and welcome to episode 4 of Attention Engineer. My name is Laura Kidd and I'm a solo artist, producer and songwriter making music as Penfriend. You can find me around the internet at Penfriend Rocks. In this noisy world, the gift of someone's attention is priceless. So thank you for joining me on my quest to go deeper, past the headlines and the hearsay, to have the conversations I've always hoped for with some of the artists I admire the most. This podcast is supported by Arts Council England and the National Lottery, and powered by the Correspondent Club. More on that in a bit. Today on the show, I have my conversation with songwriter Frank Turner to share with you. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone who's listened to the first 3 episodes of Attention Engineer so far. I was astounded to see this brand new show hit number 9 in Apple Podcasts' top music shows just 2 days after launch, and that's 100% down to you, the listener. It was pretty cool to see my little face near Alec Baldwin, George Ezra, Jessie Ware and Zane Lowe. Thank you. If you haven't heard episodes 1 to 3 yet, please do go and listen to my conversations with Tanya Donnelly, Mark Chadwick from The Levellers and Aisha Hassan from Savages. Hello to you from the Launchpad, my home studio in the beautiful city of Bristol. You may have heard our exciting local news that a statue of slave trader Edward Colston was pulled off its plinth during Sunday's Black Lives Matter demonstration, dragged down the street and thrown into the River Avon to much cheering. Yes, Bristol. Well done, everyone involved. I've lived here for coming up to 8 years now and have always found that aspect of the city's history pretty grim. It's one thing to acknowledge our questionable past, but quite another to keep giving space to its perpetrators, making people see their names and faces every day. I'm not a celebrity or a pundit, thank goodness, or someone who thinks their hot take on every topic needs to be shared on all platforms. I'm on a complicated journey towards healthier internet and social media use. I go through phases of tweeting loads and really enjoying it, and then hating everything and wanting to hide. I want to keep trying to be a better person. I read a lot and widely, and try to learn about the world. I meditate. I reflect. I think deeply. I ponder. I write my morning pages every day. My husband Tim and I talk all the time about what we've read and how we feel about it, how we can be better and do better. We nudge each other to explore new things. I care about people so much, and I see it as part of my life's work to encourage self-expression and creativity from those I'm fortunate to be in contact with. I'm interested in your stories, as well as in sharing my own. I don't think I'm better, more important, or more interesting than you. While I believe strongly in the power of individuals and in empowering people to feel like they can make change, I often prefer to stay quiet on big issues if I don't think my opinion adds any value to the discourse. I tend to have my hot takes in private. I don't want to spend all day online telling you what I think or what you should think, but I do try to share useful things that might help you on your unique journey. I used to be someone who thought that by not being racist and by being someone who would speak up if I saw or heard someone else being racist, I was doing enough. When I woke up a few years ago and realised that wasn't true, I started reading, and I started with a book called The Good Immigrant. There have been so many great resources shared online recently, but if you're feeling overwhelmed, do consider starting with this book. It features the voices of 21 writers exploring what it means to be Black, Asian and minority ethnic in the UK today. The editor, novelist Nikesh Shukla, was one of the first people I spoke to remotely for this podcast after lockdown began, so please subscribe to make sure you don't miss that upcoming episode. I want to do something more useful than simply not being a racist, and everything I've read tells me that education is the key. White people need to do the work to acknowledge, understand and usefully empathise with these systemic issues. So how do we do the work? We read, we listen, we expose ourselves to ideas that make us uncomfortable or that we find challenging rather than shutting them down and deciding it's nothing to do with us. It's everything to do with all of us. Let's keep doing the work. I've shared some more resources on my blog and would love to get your recommendations for further reading, so please come and comment at penfriend.rocks/letterbox. Now to my conversation with Frank Turner. I've been aware of Frank's music for years and always had such a great respect for his work ethic. It gives me so much hope for all of us when I see someone succeeding like that, writing beautiful, meaningful music that resonates with people from all walks of life, and headlining Wembley Arena. We met for the first time early last year when Frank invited me to perform at a War Child fundraiser as part of Brits Week. It was very exciting, and I almost didn't mind getting slapped with a congestion charge fine after not realising the venue was smack bang in the middle of the charging zone. Oops. But I digress. The gig went great, and I have to say it was pretty cool to glance down at the side of the stage in the middle of a song to see Frank Turner beaming up at me. Last week I shared my chat with Mark Chadwick from The Levellers, who Frank toured with in 2008. I asked Mark who he thought I should invite to be on this series, and he said Frank Turner. He was already on my list, but I hadn't quite worked up the courage to start asking people I didn't know very well yet, so it took me until March this year to send the email. Just a few days later, I was in Frank's dressing room at Aylesbury Waterside Theatre for what I didn't know would be my last in-person podcast chat for who knows how long, and what he didn't know would be the second to last dressing room on his solo tour, which got cancelled 2 days after we spoke. For context, this conversation was recorded on Saturday the 14th of March 2020. The UK lockdown was announced on Monday the 23rd of March. In the days leading up to Frank's gig in Aylesbury, the UK government had started to offer inadequate guidance on social gatherings, putting the responsibility on individuals without offering any financial protection for businesses, be that venues, artists or promoters. They told the public not to go out, but didn't offer any support for the businesses who would be affected by that. So everything was really uncertain until eventually the government took a stand and venues, theatres, pubs and restaurants were closed on the 20th of March, 6 days after the Aylesbury gig. Now, of course, people's health absolutely comes first, but we have to remember how confusing it was in the early days of coronavirus and how little information was coming through. In the days leading up to our chat, I saw Frank and other artists under all sorts of pressure from gig goers to both do the gigs and cancel the gigs. You'll hear Frank talk about this in his own words in a bit, but it's worth remembering that there are a lot of people involved in putting on shows of the size that he plays, and I do think the government put everyone in a really unfair situation in the weeks leading up to lockdown. We all know a lot more now, but personally, as someone who works from home and avoids the trashy 24-hour news cycle for my mental well-being, I only really started to understand the gravity of the situation we were in when Tim and I drove from Bristol to Aylesbury that Saturday afternoon on a very quiet M4. When we got home the next day, that was it. I haven't been anywhere since. It really was a pleasure and a privilege to talk to Frank, and then to get to see this wonderful show afterwards was such a treat. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, I find myself for the very first time in Aylesbury. Frank Turner?
Yeah,
Have you been here before?
I've never been to Aylesbury either.
What is Aylesbury about?
It's a mystic land of chocolate and pixies. I don't really know, to be honest, because this being a tour bus tour, I've done the standard thing of waking up outside a venue and walking inside. So I haven't yet seen any of Aylesbury either.
Well, thank you, Aylesbury, for having us. And just to start talking about you, Frank.
Okay.
This is the thing about having musicians on this. They're quite used to this. And they tend to say, yes, I'd love to talk about myself for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, we're diving straight in. I have to say that this is going to sound really weird and possibly overly kind of self-absorbed, but like there was a thing I noticed a few years ago that like there are certain people that I know who are older musicians, I'm not going to mention any names, but they've been doing it so long that they tend to treat most conversations a little bit like an interview and just start sort of talking about what they're doing in a way that's quite interviewee and not very conversational.
And do you find that that's apropos of nothing quite a lot of times?
Yeah, but it's
I
just,
do too.
At the very least, it becomes very, very self-focused every conversation they have because they're used to being asked about themselves and what they do. And I don't want to turn into somebody who's like an interviewee 24 hours a day. And like I am consciously trying in my late 30s to make sure that I'm like not doing that, you know, and that I'm asking more questions of other people and trying to be engaged with the conversation. There's a risk of making me sound like a complete idiot saying that, but it's true. You know, I don't want to be somebody who in every conversation starts an answer with, I'm glad you asked me that. Do you know what I mean? That's
a good delaying tactic, I think. I think people do that quite often in interviews because they want to have time to think about the answer. So they go, what a great question, they say, and then they pause. So you can have that one if you like. Okay.
I mean, the one thing I would say, as far as interviews go, one of the things I really enjoy is a question that stumps me because I do an awful lot of interviews and I generally have, they're not identical, but it's pretty stock answers to questions because questions have answers.
Yes.
All the rest of it. And every now and again, somebody will ask you a question that makes you go, Like, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, I hope to have several of those.
Well, I'm excited
because I'm
about
not
that.
really an interviewer.
Okay, excellent.
I'm
Good.
just a musician. So hopefully my part of this is to ask you questions that people don't ask you.
I'm
when
excited
you've got
about
a
it.
microphone in your face.
I will be blabbing more than usual, in which case.
Great. All right. So first of all then, how would you introduce yourself to a stranger at a party?
Good question. I mean, the thing is,
glad you asked me that.
this is not hypothetical. It happens often. And that's another thing that goes to what I do for a living, because again, on a professional level, I'm generally surrounded by people who know who I am and what I do. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite often, when I'm on my own tours, I'm the focus and center of attention and all the rest of it. And I think it's good for the soul to go to places where that isn't true. You know, I went with my wife to a party for the drummer in her band's 40th birthday the other day. And like, nobody there had any idea who I was. And it raises an interesting question because, you know, a lot of people there were kind of musicians and actors, a lot of jazz players were there kind of thing, and people who are sort of jobbing musicians on the circuit kind of thing in London. And, you know, you chat away and the fact it comes up that you're a musician as well, and then they want to know who you are and what you do. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, I'm a big deal. I'm not going to say that. It's a bit like the age-old thing of when you're growing up and you go to family gatherings, parties, Christmas, whatever it might be, and your aunt says, there's a particular word in the sentence which is the absolute killer. She goes, "Are you still doing your music?" And it's just like, oh my God. You know, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get to a place, but I don't mean to just sort of casually drop this out there, but like when we did the Olympic thing that we did a few years ago,
the Olympic thing.
Well, yeah. See, this is exactly what happens. But like,
was it the DIY Punk Olympics?
Yeah, the DIY Punk Olympics
actual...
that we did, yes. But like when we did that convinced quite a few people in my family that I do actually have a real
Isn't it funny that
job.
It took that long though?
Yeah, completely. I mean,
Sold
we'd
out
already
Shepherd's Bush Empire.
Yeah,
played
we played at Wembley Stadium. We'd headlined and sold out Wembley Arena prior to that.
Doesn't count,
but it was on the telly. Do you know what I mean?
So wow,
it was on the
powerful.
telly. But I mean, you know, but this thing, you can't judge anybody else for not being aware of who you are. That's the worst possible thing you could do. I think I have a sort of theory that there is a degree of kind of filtration in our industry, which is positive in the sense that, like, I just think that if you're an arsehole to everybody, sooner or later, it's just unsustainable. Unless you're like the most talented person ever, which is entirely possible.
Yeah.
But like, you know, most of us kind of bumble along with medium levels of talent and do our best. And if you're an arsehole while you're doing that, sooner or later, promoters aren't going to put you on. Do you know what I mean?
Unless you've got the super nicest manager in the world who's like dealing with it for you.
Sure, absolutely.
If you've got that person.
But then, I mean, how could you have any self-respect if you're that person?
I think arseholes really don't care.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, definitionally. Yeah, okay, fine. But like, it is kind of cool. Like, you know, there's basically this Titanic Schadenfreude, which is not a particularly attractive emotion to have,
we all
but I
pretend
have
not
it.
to have it.
There have been plenty of times, because I've been doing this for so long. I've been touring since '98. I've been, you know, doing solo stuff for 15 years. I have seen bands come and go by the bucket load, and every now and again, when you realise that there was a band who not only kind of, the sort of selfish part of it is bands who kind of motor past you and get a huge record deal that you never got and blah, blah, blah. But then, you know, but also were arseholes about it at the time.
Yeah.
And when you see that they're all kind of like maybe hoping they'll get a reunion show in a few years' time and a charity booking from a promoter, I can't help but feel a little glow inside me, because there feels like there's some small amount of justice there. Not about the bit where people are doing better than me. That's not what I'm talking about. But the bit where people were arseholes.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no issue with seeing somebody who's inconsiderate fail.
Podcast done.
Yes, there we go.
That's it.
There we go. There's my epitaph.
So, well, and we're in a global pandemic, so we shouldn't use those words really. Epitaph.
No, totally. Who knows what will be happening by the time that this is released into the world? I mean, who knows what's going to be happening tomorrow?
I think all my interviews are going to have to go onto Skype soon.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in a place right now. We don't need to talk about this for long, but like, I mean, we're on this tour. We are waking up every morning and trying to decide if the show is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult because there's conflicting information and advice and indeed opinions that, like, the arseholes that everybody has one. I hate social media anyway, but it's particularly awful at the moment, I think, and just people are just being dickheads at the moment. So
how do you view your responsibility in all of this as the person who people have paid to come and see? And people forget, people travel, they have accommodation, they have travel costs, totally. Babysitters and all that.
Well, and also I spend a fair amount of my time rhetorically sort of saying that like what I do isn't particularly important, because I do think that versus like a nurse or a teacher or anything like that what I do isn't that important. If I stopped doing it tomorrow, the world would continue to spin in its axis. But at the same time, a lot of people take a lot of emotional comfort and solace and support from the arts and from creative things. And in the instance of people who buy tickets to my shows, I think I can say this without being up my own arse, that applies.
Well, they bought the tickets because they want to come, Frank. They want to go to the show.
Oh, it's so hard
okay
to say out loud.
But
like, seriously, I mean, so responsibility is an interesting word just because, on the one level, on the negative side of the balance sheet, I am the one gathering people here tonight. If I pull the show, then people won't gather here tonight. And if people gathering is a disaster, then I have at least some small responsibility in that. I'm also a big believer in personal responsibility. And there is the angle that, if you feel like it's not right for you to go, you can just not go. That, of course, then brings up a lot of very, very difficult logistical issues about refunds, which we are trying to navigate at the moment. Not least because I'm not actually technically the person putting on the show tonight. The promoter is, you know what I mean? I get paid after the event. But of course, if you're average punter, that's not how it appears and how they engage with it emotionally. So there's all these kind of issues we're trying to work through. But I mean, to skip the word responsibility for a minute, like, this is what I do. Yeah. This is the only thing I know how to do. And like, there are people like, oh, you're feathering a nest while people are getting ill. There's a line that's been coming on. Oh, loads of people have got that opinion. And it's kind of like, what, I am going to get paid for the show tonight. But the thing is, it's like, I make money when I can because there's acres of time when I can't, which might also include vast swathes of the rest of my life. And, months coming up which are going to be dead because the music industry has collapsed. But it's not just about me. This is the main thing. I've got crew. I've got tour bus drivers, I've got tour managers, guitar techs, production managers. I've got 2 American friends of mine on the tour who've flown over here and are losing money being here anyway. And if they lose the income from the remainder of the shows, they're fucked. And they're dear friends of mine. It's like there's a lot of kind of how that weighs up versus global pandemic is an interesting question, but it's not inconsiderable. No. And it's in the literal sense of that word, I have to consider that as well.
When I say responsibility, I don't think I mean it in the sort of pejorative way either, like you need to take responsibility. I mean, there is a responsibility when I feel when you have a platform of any kind to use that in the way that matches with your values. And I think that's exactly what you do. Yeah. And I think it's really, frankly, disgusting when I see really awful shit targeted at you on Twitter. I don't understand it.
Well, I stopped reading Twitter, and believe me, it's a wonderful cut-through solution to that situation. Well, I stopped reading all feeds about 6 months ago, maybe, and my life is so much better. I feel that we have passed peak Twitter. 5 years ago, if everybody was having a go at me on Twitter and I told somebody else, they'd be like, "Oh, what are they saying?" Nowadays, if I tell people that people having a go at me on Twitter, people go, "Yeah, of course they are. It's Twitter. That's what it's for."
It is, yeah.
And I think that it has just drained itself of like any sort of interest or goodwill, and it's just this hideous mob of people looking for something to be angry about. Yeah. And like, in what fucking universe am I going to waste my time with that? Exactly. Do you know what I mean? A very decent point that I read in an article not too long ago is like, you've got to understand that the currency of Twitter is attention, not knowledge. And once you understand that, it all becomes clear. It doesn't matter if you're right or if you're correct or if what you're saying is the truth on Twitter. What matters is whether it catches people's attention. And in that sense, it goes to the very worst parts of our culture and of our instincts and all the rest of it. And now we talk about Mark Twain, and a lie gets around the world in the time it takes the truth to get its boots on. I mean, that is now 1,000,000 times truer thanks to Twitter. And the thing is, once you stop engaging, you walk down the street and realize that absolutely no one you walk past in a crowded street on a Saturday afternoon knows even the first thing that has been stressing you out and making you not sleep and not eat and lose your fucking mind for however long. And it's kind of cleansing. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. Well, this podcast is called Attention Engineer because I was reading a lot about this last year when I was kind of coming off social media and on a daily basis, because I was using it, every day for many years. Yeah. And I was not happy anymore. Yeah. And so I started like trying to read about the science behind all of the dopamine addiction and all that kind of stuff. An attention engineer is a specialist who works at big tech companies to keep you on your phone, essentially. Keep you using their services at all times. Yeah, yeah. They take Las Vegas casino strategies to keep you on there. That's why there's a bell and little lights flash and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought, I don't want to be manipulated that way.
No,
so I
totally.
started really coming off it. And the reason I called this podcast Attention Engineers, because I'm talking to musicians, writers, performers of all kinds, who I think are kind of expected to be those attention engineers. So by posting anything online, you're hoping people see it, right?
Sure.
And I don't want to be someone who's spending so much time trying to make people still be on Twitter, essentially.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I thought it would be an interesting twist.
I think that's perfectly valid and good. I think that it's a funny thing because, like, in principle, on paper, social media is it's a tool in the sense that fire is a tool, and you can cook food or you can set yourself on fire. Do you know what I mean? It's like it can be used for good and it can be used for ill. And there have been times in my life where social media has been really cool, and I'm probably going to use it next week when I've got a bunch of shows that are definitely cancelled, and I'm going to do like a webcast show on Facebook as a fundraiser for my crew is my plan, because they are the people who are going to suffer the most in my immediate orbit from this. So, you know, it has the potential to be used for interesting, good things. And I certainly still use Twitter as a broadcast tool. Yeah. You know, I mean, this morning I put out a tweet saying the show is still on. I'm not going to fucking read the replies to that. No. Jesus Christ. But like, you know, posting showtimes, we have charities every day on the tour. Today we have Dash Charity, who do stuff to domestic violence and sexualized violence in society. So they're coming down, which is cool. And I've shared this information on social media. And so it's a funny thing, I think, for me and for musicians generally. I kind of want everybody else to be on Twitter because then I can reach them, but I don't want to be on it myself. Do you know what I mean? Which is an odd thing to think, because I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that, actually.
I think that makes perfect sense, because I was reading a book, and Janice, have you heard about Janice Ian's, a songwriter called Janice Ian?
I know Janice. I don't know, we have communicated often.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. Well, I've only just read this thing about her. I haven't listened to her music yet, but I must. And she's talking about...
you definitely know one of her songs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I learned the truth at 17, that love was made for beauty.
That's a beautiful song.
That's Janice Ian.
Great.
And she's a genius. She's amazing.
Well, she wrote this brilliant thing in a book about how it's okay to admit that creativity takes a lot of energy, and therefore you need to look after yourself. Yeah. And I think part of that is not getting caught up in this daily social media hate fest.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just the amount of fucking time that social media can suck out of your life. I've got other shit to do.
I mean, Be More Kind is a brilliant example, I think, of a song that should be our national anthem, to be honest. It's a beautiful song. It always brings tears to my eyes. It might be sort of crushing that it's always going to be relevant, because there's never going to be a time, I don't think, where everyone's kind enough and that song is irrelevant. No, unfortunately.
Of course. Many people I know, and in my worst moments myself as well, there's this kind of like, people have sort of got to this point where they find joy in or at least dopamine, let's say, in being divided from other people and in hating their opponents and in thinking the worst of their opponents and in removing their opponents' humanity. And I'm a massive history nerd, but you do not need to be one of those to appreciate that at a point in history where people start dehumanizing the people they disagree with, bad things happen. Very dangerous, very quickly, shortly thereafterwards.
People don't go on the internet to have their minds changed by other people, unfortunately. Yes. So I feel like most of it's a waste of time anyway.
Completely, and I'm as guilty as that as anybody else.
I mean, you're too busy, surely, having best-selling books and things to take us into a more artistic area.
There we go. Good. Excellent.
Because that's a pretty cool thing. How does it feel as to be a musician with a best-selling book? So the first one was, right?
Yeah, well, I've had two.
I know you've had two, but
two Sunday Times bestsellers. The first one, I'm now going to blow my own trumpet for 30 seconds, so brace yourselves, listeners.
This is a podcast about you. It's okay.
Okay. The first one was number one there's two bestseller lists, and it was number one in one and number two in the other, and I think that makes it number one, in my opinion.
In an average sort of
it was me or Alex Salmond. And, you know, he's, well, exactly, that particular week. Second one was a little bit, it was like number 3, which is respectable.
That's very respectable. You're a musician. What are you doing writing books anyway? Where did that come from?
I think the thing about having two now makes me more comfortable using the word author to describe myself. Yeah. If you've got one could be a fluke.
I don't know. Be an accident. It's a lot of work. You didn't accidentally write a book.
I didn't accidentally write a book. I did go into the first book thinking it would be easy, and learned in short order that I'm an idiot for thinking that. And it was a classic hubris nemesis situation. Right. Just because I was like, I've written newspaper articles that were this many words before, and then how many of those? Well, that's like 50 newspaper articles. I can do that.
Any blog, that's the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's easy. And it wasn't easy at all, because obviously there's such a thing as kind of structural arc and all this kind of business. Yeah. So I found the first one really quite challenging. Second one was easier.
Good. Really? It was.
Yeah,
I haven't read
definitely.
that one
And-
yet, but I'm going to.
Sorry?
I haven't read that one yet, but I'm going to.
It's more esoteric. It's more didactic, should we say? It's about songwriting. And the first one was more just sort of drunk tour stories kind of thing.
Definitely was that, yeah.
Yes, which was lots of fun.
Yeah.
But
Surely hard to remember, though.
well, the disclaimer at the start of the book says basically this is my version of events. Definitionally, if you were there and think it went down a different way, I'm not going to argue.
Write your own book.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, part of the motivation for writing that book actually was just that I knew that some of those memories were going to start fading in time, as is the human condition. So I definitely wanted to kind of get stuff down on paper before it slipped away.
Yeah. I think it's
And
brilliant. that you
in
did that.
10 years' time, I'll read it myself just to be like, ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, you've also done a pretty brilliant podcast series, which, I mean, I've listened to most of them, and the one about William Blake and Catherine Blake in particular,
Yes.
I found so brilliant, because that was one of the songs that really stands out for me from your most
Thank
recent
you.
album. And then listening to that, basically a little history lesson on all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then listening to it again when you play it acoustically outside, brilliantly
Yeah, yeah.
recorded, I must say.
Yes,
as someone
well,
who likes microphones.
I'd
and
love to take
recording
credit for
stuff.
that.
It was
but
really
I
well
can't.
done.
No, it was brilliant done. I mean, that was a wonderful thing. And the most fun part of the podcast for me was always just trying to find people who knew more about what we were talking about than I did, which wasn't hard. But you know, it was really cool. And like when I went to Dodge City to talk about Dora Hand and spoke to the curator of Dodge City Museum, I actually found out that I was incorrect about one of the lines in the song.
I know.
At which point I plead artistic license.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I really enjoyed that. I thought it was cool. You know, it was like she was like, I don't actually know anything about her funeral, and I went, oh. I did go back and find the book that I'd read it in, but she said, and she would know,
Yeah.
like, no, we don't know about her funeral.
That's a shame. But do you have any aspirations to doing like history TV? You could be the Brian Cox of history, musician, history.
I'll be honest, that's a thing that has crossed my mind, and a couple of exploratory conversations have begun. I mean, I
Great.
am so passionate about history. One of my things that I do, because London history is my absolute obsession in life, and quite often when I have friends from other countries come to London, I will give them a little tour of the city. Quite often you go on one of the open top buses and just take the headphones out, and I'll do my own little guided tour, because it's boring of me, but I know enough to do a reasonable kind of history.
Well, I can
of the
see a
city.
future tour situation that is exactly that, with
Well,
you playing some songs about London.
Yeah,
No?
I do think that if all this music lark falls about, being a kind of history tour guide around London is definitely a career option.
Yeah. It's so good. What I loved is just brings stuff to life. Like, I'm not someone who's going to read a massive history book. I mostly read novels and stuff. But it's so interesting that you're able to write songs about historical characters and it's not boring. First of all, well done.
Well, thank you very much.
And then bringing
That's
them to
kind of
life
you
through the
say.
podcast, I thought was really great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the motivation for the podcast was just that, like, when I was writing those songs, there was a definite moment where it was like, either these songs if they're going to be shallow enough to be understood at first glance by anybody who's not an expert in this, they're also not going to be interesting or meaningful in any way. But if I go into it, if I get into the weeds in terms of the history and the characters and the references and all that kind of thing, there's got to be some kind of primer that goes along with it.
Yeah.
We discussed the merits of, like, you know, a book or an extremely long album liner notes or whatever, and various different options got suggested. And then, as we are demonstrating right now, podcasting is still kind of Wild West. It's still very DIY.
Don't know what you mean.
But I didn't
I've got a
mean
very
that in a
professional
bad
setup,
way.
thanks.
But, you know, it's definitely, it's wide open, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. And it was really cool because, as I'm sure you know, when you come up with a creative idea and pitch it to a company, 9 times out of 10, that's the beginning of a long and slightly irritating process where things get moved around and knocked into shape and all the rest of it. I sat down for a meeting with something else, the podcast production company we work with, and I pitched them my idea, and they went, cool. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, we can probably start recording in about 2 weeks' time.
Fantastic.
And I said, wait, what? And, you know, I'd had all these kind of bits where I decided I'll give a bit of ground on that and, you know, suggest this as an alternative. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The kind of shit you do.
That's
Strategy,
smart. Yeah.
as they say. And didn't need to do any of it. They just went, yeah, cool, sweet. And they were so cool and so helpful about the whole thing, and I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
But in terms of doing something else, I mean, I really enjoyed podcasts. I really enjoyed talking about history in a public forum. A lot of people asked if I continued the podcast after I got to the end of the songs on the record, which didn't really make massive sense to me. It's sort of it's a package deal,
Self-contained series.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've got various ideas. The idea of marrying a podcast with an album was really cool to me. One idea that I have that is I should preface this by saying, as I'm sure you know, that the way that most creative people are successful, who are successful, is by having loads of irons in the fire.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And of 50 irons, 50 ideas bouncing on your head, one, maybe two of them will become real. But one of the ideas bouncing on my head, I'm obsessed with the history of music hall as a genre, because I think it's fascinating. It was the popular music of its day for 100 years, and it has been completely erased from popular memory. And in many ways, I think that's tragic. And part of the reason why I think Chas and Dave are not only one of my favourite bands, one of the most important bands of the 20th century, is they're the only act going who made a conscious attempt to keep music hall alive in the context of the music they made. And I have a Chas and Dave tattoo right here. And I was fortunate enough to play with them once, which was a huge deal for me. Basically, there's no recordings in music hall because it, as an art form, predates recording technology, but there's tons and tons of sheet music out there.
Okay.
I can't read music very well. It takes me forever, but Matt Nazir from the Sleeping Souls can, or I'll get better at it. But my idea was possibly to try and make a record of music hall songs and do a podcast at a company that would talk about the history of the art form.
Well, I might be wrong here, but I think Duke Special also did some music hall stuff. We toured together a few years ago, and he was playing stuff that was from sheet music.
I'm sure that you are right about that.
He'd be a good person to talk to if you need to talk to someone about it.
Weirdly, the foremost authority on music hall is John Major. His parents were a musical act called Drum and Major. His father was already in his 60s when he was, or in his 50s when he was born. He had, by the standards of the time, a much older father. And the book opens with this really quite moving scene in which he said, he was a surly teenager. His father was in hospital dying, and his mum told him to go and see him, and they had no real working relationship. And he went and kind of sullenly sat at the end of the bed. And then one by one, all these weird old dudes came in and just did their turn at the end of the bed.
Wow.
And he said, as much as I didn't know what was going on and didn't like my dad, I was smart enough to realize that I was witnessing something that would never be witnessed again. This was the death of an art form happening at the end of a hospital bed in Brixton. So he started paying attention to it. And it's a beautiful story.
That's amazing. I'm very stunned. I'm very quiet right now. I'm taking this.
I mean, let's not discuss John Major's politics. But he's definitely, he comes across as a very sort of human person in this, and then writes extremely knowledgeably about musical. His book's called My Old Band. If you're interested in it, it is the book to read about musical.
Well, and here's another example of how you should never peg someone for one specific thing you know about them, because it's,
No, completely. Do
we
you
have
know what
infinite capacities, I think is the
exactly.
quote.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm blown away by
on that bombshell.
I think we're on question 2.
Yes.
Here we go. I think we are. This is the part of the podcast where I say a giant thank you to my buddies in the Correspondence Club. Thank you. Members get podcast extras, free music, online gigs and access to our friendly forum, plus loads of other perks in return for being an integral part of my musical world. We're all going through a really weird time at the moment, so there are 2 free tiers available, and I would really just encourage you to sign up to hear more about the project and get a bunch of freebies, and then you can take it from there. There's even a quarterly community zine, which I'm starting to put together this week, and submissions are open. So if you're listening and would like to contribute something, whether that's a poem, a story, or a drawing, visit penfriend.rocks/join to sign up to a free or paid tier, and get in touch. The theme for the first zine is Everything Looks Normal in the Sunshine, which is the name of my lockdown single. You can hear that on my website too. Come and visit sometime. Now, back to my conversation with Frank Turner. And I'm about to ask a quite lofty and difficult question. Let's see how he gets on with that. Can songs change the world?
No. I don't think they can. I think songs can change individual people, and individual people change the world. I grew up immersed in the world of anarchist hardcore punk, and that was my entire universe for a long time, a long and formative period of my life. And I just saw band after band after band after band telling me that they were going to smash the state by playing, a bunch of ragged hardcore. And I hate to...
It's a nice idea.
It didn't work. In fact, Million Dead, my old band, we had a song on an early demo that's definitely a rarity, but it was called One More Power Chord and the System's Done For, that was about this. I can't...
Did you mean it, or was it tongue-in-cheek?
Oh, no, it was complete. It was a deeply sarcastic song.
Okay, very good.
And it was kind of a rip on all the crust bands that I'd grown up going to see. And the thing is, obviously I was writing that when I was like 19 and pissed off at everything, not just the world, but also the other people who were pissed off at the world, which was an interesting place to be in. But like, as an older person, I mean, I can see a lot of these people where they were making art, they were in the right place and it was art that I loved and all the rest of it. But it's just like, I don't think that Bob Dylan changed the world with his songwriting. I think that culture is more reactive than that. I think that Bob Dylan soundtracked the 60s to the extent that he did in a way that was very interesting and very useful and important. But writing songs about Medgar Evers or whatever didn't change anything in Alabama in the 1960s. No. That was the Civil Rights Act. Do you know what I mean? And like, which is much, much more important when you're talking about all that kind of thing. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about sort of being reticent about how important what I do is. You know, Rage Against the Machine politicized me to a degree when I was younger. It certainly got me reading a lot of stuff. And in fact, more so than that, Propaganda definitely blew my reading list wide open, shall we say. And that's cool, and that changed my life as an individual. But did Propaganda or Rage Against the Machine never change the world? I mean, I don't think so. And I think that what Rage Against the Machine now is kind of a little questionable, you know, doing the kind of the American Express Arena, you know, $200 a ticket, smash system, and it's kind of like, really?
I think reflecting the world and what's going on is important.
Yes,
because otherwise you're kind of ignoring it.
The one thing I would say about that, though, is that I feel with extremely strongly that the responsibility of an artist is to make the art that they think they want to make.
Yep.
If the artistic impulse inside them wants them to make love songs or whatever, then that's what they should do. And this idea that everybody should be politicized all the time, I think is tedious, actually. And also, some people will do it better than others. I mean, there are many reasons why I don't really consider myself a political songwriter, but one of them, a not inconsiderable one of them, is I don't think I'm very good at it. And I think that someone like Grace Petrie is much better at it, or Billy Bragg, or Sam Duckworth, or whoever. Do you know what I mean? And I would rather let them do that than put out stuff that feels not good to me. But do you know what I mean? It's like the idea that there's something lesser about Magnetic Fields because he wrote 69 love songs is nonsensical to me.
Yeah,
it's
I agree.
An absolutely classic record. There's definitely a thing, and I say this with love and respect to anybody from this place that I'm about to mention, but like there's definitely a thing about California. There's an awful lot of songs about how great California is written by people who are from California, and after a while it's like, I fucking get it. Do you know what I mean?
It's
like,
good though. I've been there.
Sunny.
It's nice.
It's sunny all the fucking time.
Nice
well
food.
done. But you'd never get Joy Division from California. Do you know what I mean? So,
exactly.
So fuck off.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, I say this with the obvious understanding that lots of people disagree and they are welcome to do it, and I wish to take nothing away from anybody, but I cannot fucking stand the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And one of the reasons is they tend to write songs about how great it is to be sort of young, pretty and rich and living in LA. And it just means nothing to me at all. Oh, Vienna. But do you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, oh, great. That, though, then makes me think of it. This was kind of a New Year's resolution of mine a few years ago. Life is too fucking short to be angry about other people's taste in music.
Oh, completely.
But I mean, I spent many years being angry about other people's taste in music. But to pick an example, I'm not a fan of the music of Kasabian, right? But every morning, Kasabian get up and they make Kasabian fans happy. And when they play shows, Kasabian fans have a good time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's great, and I think they should do more of it. And I wish them every success. I hope they play bigger shows and release more albums, sell more records.
As they can be.
Yeah, exactly.
Fans,
good for them. I wish them every success. And in fact, as you and I know very well, to achieve any kind of meaningful success in the music industry is hard as shit.
It's really hard.
So hats off to Nickelback. Fuck it, hats off to Nickelback. Do you know what I mean? I can't stand Nickelback's music, but they make Nickelback fans happy. I mean, some of their music videos make me want to literally gouge my own eyes out. But like,
don't watch them then.
But exactly, just then don't fucking watch them. Don't watch
so
them.
Much other things
you know, and on a selfish level, I want to say this to some of the people who spend their days being angry that I exist and make music. It's just like, don't listen to it. Don't come to the shows.
Yeah.
Don't fucking buy the albums. I'd rather you didn't if they're going to upset you. Do you know what I mean? Plus, there's so much more than 24 hours of new music released every single day.
Yeah.
Like, go and find something you like and expend your energy being enthusiastic about that.
Well, there's a great power, and it's something I've clung on to. There's a great power in understanding that what you do is not for everyone, and it's not supposed to be for everyone.
Exactly.
But it's funny when people can't understand that it's not supposed to be for them.
Right, completely right. But you know,
it's not a judgment.
Not
it's
everybody
just,
loves
you
the
don't
Beatles,
like it.
and that's fine.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm sort of. in the camp of like loving some, but not all.
Yeah.
I don't like the Rolling Stones particularly, but you know, I'd be an idiot to say they didn't completely change music. And once again, if Rolling Stones fans get a kick out of going to see the Rolling Stones, then I wish them to continue doing
that. Some people get a bit kind of football-y about it, and if you really dislike a really important artist of theirs, then you know, there's a sort of, they have to stand up for it. Like, I really loathe Bob Dylan. Can't stand it.
Fine.
I hate his voice.
Right.
But I'm not saying...
It's an acquired taste.
Well, and maybe it's just not for me, and I accept that. But I know people who have had discussions with this, you know, about this, and they really can't let it go.
I didn't like Dylan until quite late, and I just didn't get it. And then I had this like epiphany one day where I just suddenly...
And maybe I will.
Maybe you will.
I'm up for it.
Or maybe you won't.
Maybe not.
And who gives a shit?
He doesn't care, and that's fine.
But like, there's moments, and again, I'm certainly not an all or nothing fan for Dylan. I think he's released plenty of dross, and indeed, I'm not super interested in much of what he did after a certain point in time. Whilst I respect his creative questing, which he does a lot of, he's somebody who changes who he is very regularly.
I just don't want to hear it.
Well, then don't listen.
Exactly.
But like, you know, I mean, the football-y part, I know exactly what you mean. The defensiveness comes if somebody kind of goes, that band's fucking worthless. And it's like, well, it self-evidently isn't, because people are taking worth out of it. But to say it's not for me is a different statement.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not for me, and that's fine.
And it's also it's an inarguable statement as well. You can't argue somebody into liking something. No. It's not possible.
Yeah. I've definitely tried to like certain bands and then gone, why am I trying to like this? That's not working.
Yeah. But on the flip side, I had a wonderful thing the other day. We were touring in Europe, and my production manager, Dougie, and I stayed up late drinking one night after a show on the bus as we drove through Germany somewhere. And I started going off on one about Leonard Cohen and about how I do think he is one of the greatest songwriters who's ever lived. And Dougie was just sort of went, you know, I've never really listened to Leonard Cohen. And I was like, motherfucker, like, get another bottle out of the fridge, shut up and sit down. And I just like went, and shouted at him about Leonard Cohen and played him songs for about 4 hours. But it was great. He came out of it kind of going, he was like, I've just been listening to Leonard Cohen like non-stop for the last
There's so much stuff. Of course, someone's going to pass us by.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's fine.
I don't know about you. I always have a long list of bands that I'm going to get round to.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, people are just like, oh my God, have you not got into Neutral Milk Hotel yet? And I'm like, I'm getting there. It's on the list.
There's a lot.
You know, but some days when I sit down to listen to music, I just want to listen to something I already know and like.
Yeah, I'm a bit bad for that. I tend to listen to familiar things or nothing at all. I love silence. I love it. Especially when I'm writing. I've been writing this album for like a year. So I don't really want to listen to anything else because I don't want it to dribble
because that's distracting. I mean, I find in terms of like maybe not writing music, but like working, I have a long-standing taste in like ambient music and everything Brian Eno and down, but even like modern classical stuff, like Johan Johansson and stuff like that. I find that's easy. I find that actually helpful to if I'm writing prose. Yeah, I find it quite sort of soothing and engaging to have that on in the background. I enjoy that. But yeah, you can't write a song whilst listening to another song. That doesn't really work.
God, no. That's really weird. Yeah. What's the thing you're most proud of creating so far, and why?
Good question. He said, playing for time. Last year at Lost Evenings 3 in Boston, which was every year thus far has been the best one yet. Partly because we're figuring out what the fuck it is and how to do it and coming up with new ideas and all the rest of it. And the bill last year was just so on point for me personally. We had a Hold Steady Against Me, John K. Samson, Loudon Wainwright, all these kind of Corey Brannan, et cetera, et cetera. But it just, you know, the idea for that was to sort of create a little bubble for a few days. And obviously there's a degree of ego in me saying this because it is centered around my music. But then this is answering your question about what I've created. Like for 4 days, it was just a whole bunch of people hanging out on Lansdowne Street in Boston, and everybody was just being nice to each other and, you know, in supporting the bands and enjoying and checking people out and raising money for charities and checking out the various activist groups that we had and just sort of being decent to each other. And this is a thing that's hard for me to objectively judge for many different reasons, but like people often say to me that the vibe at my shows and at Lost Evenings in particular is noticeable for its kind of caringness, which makes me really happy because that is a thing that I have actively thought about and worked on. Yeah. And, you know, I want that to be the case, and it's nice to see it working.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's beautiful.
And just stuff like, you know, a way that I've sort of developed that gets around ticket touting as an idea, which is something I find extremely irritating, is that there's this thing which I had nothing to do with creating and have nothing to do with maintaining, which is called the Frank Turner Army on Facebook. It's got like 15,000 people on it now. And if there's a show coming that's sold out, you can just go post on there and someone will sort you a ticket.
That's great.
And if you've got one to get rid of, you just go in there and you get rid of it. And like people help each other out with accommodation and show times, and people are like, oh, you know, I'm going to this gig, I've got nowhere to stay. People put each other up. And it's just this very sort of friendly collective vibe. And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, you should be proud of that.
Yeah.
But you've always gone out of your way to give time and space to other people's voices, not just your own, to charities, to other artists. Most bands are very out for themselves, most artists, I feel.
Right.
Because it's, as you say, it's really, really hard to succeed. So it's
Sure.
very easy to, I think, to get your blinkers on and just, you know, power ahead.
Yeah.
Without going, well, we could have safe gigs for women along, or we could, you know, talk about this issue, or I'm sure it's very hard for you to talk about that without feeling like you're self-aggrandizing in some way. Like, look at all the cool charity shit I've done. So I'm not going to make you do that. But I just think that's worth sort of pointing out to people who might be a bit of a Frank Turner naysayer, because you're not someone who talks the talk and doesn't walk the walk.
I do my best. I mean, a lot of it comes from the great fortune that I had to experience a genuine underground scene when I was younger. I'm generally quite suspicious of the word scene, because it more often than not feels like a journalistic construct than anything else. But the hardcore scene in London in the 90s was definitely a thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was 200 to 300 people who would be at all the shows, and we all knew each other and we'd all help each other out. And there was this real sense that when you were on the stage, that was your turn, but it wasn't a permanent set in stone division. And, you know, people just helped out. Do you know what I mean? And that was my first experience of live music and of music as something more than just a noise coming out of my stereo. Yeah. And it was hugely formative to me. And one of my very best friends said to me a few years ago, I think at the first Lost Evenings, he just started laughing and he said, I've just figured out what you're doing. And I said, what? And he said, you're just trying to make the punk scene as you imagined it to be when you were 16, but it wasn't quite. You're just trying to make that real. You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah. I fucking am. You know what I mean? Guilty as charged. Yeah. Why not? Because it was a beautiful idea and a beautiful dream. And if I can create that around what I do, then fucking why not? Yeah. You know what I mean? But like, and a big part of that is sharing ideas and sharing spaces and all the rest of it. I've always been really sort of conscious about who I take out as supports, because partly because I got that hand up on the way up from lots of different people gave me a chance, and it would be churlish of me not to pay it forward. But also, I feel responsible for the bill. I don't want people to come down and suffer through 2 shit bands who brought onto the bill through the record label before they get into something that's worth listening to. And also, this is a thing. There are bands who will not take out other bands because they think they're better than them live.
I know,
and I
what's
think
that
it is
about?
Base cowardice.
It's ridiculous.
And I mean, I can't really say this without sounding hugely up my own arse, but it is true. I know for a fact that we have not got a couple of support slots in life because people have thought that we were better than the headliner in checking us out before the event. And I'm just like, you fucking cowards. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nothing I love more than a support act who's better than me, or who I suspect might be better than me. I remember this band called Larry and His Flask from Oregon, who we toured with a bunch like about 8 years ago. And I had their records and I loved the records, and I'd sort of met the guys and they were nice dudes. So we took them out on tour, and the first date of the tour was in Boston in the USA. And I went down to watch their show, as I tend to do. And they remain one of the best live acts I've ever seen in my fucking life. The set finished with the drummer jamming, stage diving into his drum kit, which was set up in the middle of the audience, and taking it out. And it was just, and I went back upstairs to the dressing room where the rest of my band were hanging out, and I was like, guys, we have a problem. We have just been blown off the fucking stage comprehensively. Yeah. But it was great, because we all then that night and throughout the rest of the tour, we were all like, right, fucking come on, we got to step this shit up. Yeah. One of my favorite musical connections in my life in recent years has been the Arkells from Canada, because Max from Arkells, who is a dear friend of mine, he and I think about music and performance in the exact same way, in a way that I've not really encountered in anyone else I've met in my life. It's a little bit spooky at times. And touring with him was such fun, because there was very friendly, but there was a rivalry around it. And like every night, like they'd do something, I'd be like, oh, fuck, okay. And then we'd do something. And then also, like, there was a bit where they slightly nicked a little bit of one of my skits in their set, and I was like, oh.
And they're on first, so it looks like it was
well, but
theirs,
then we
right?
went to Canada and the bill flipped because they're huge in Canada, they're Canadian.
Right.
So I was like, I'm fucking getting you back to that, dickhead. But do you know what I mean? There was this real sense of like, because this, you know, performance is a separate skill to musicianship and songwriting. These are 3 separate disciplines. And like, you know, it was just so cool to hang out with a bunch of people who understood that in the same way that I do. And we're like, you know, it's like, how do we make this performance better? How do we make this a better show? And when I was younger, I would have been really resistant to the idea of talking in those terms about what I do. It's not a show. I'm not an entertainer. But now it's like, it is a show. I am an entertainer. That's what I do. And it was just very much like, just trying to step it up.
So speaking of people you've supported, it looks like, I think, was it 2009 when you supported The Offspring? What was that like? Were they the biggest shows you'd done to that point? Because I know that you then sold out Shepherd's Bush Empire, which is no small feat, a few months later. But
they probably were, yeah.
And were you playing solo?
Yes.
So tell us what that's like.
That was a really interesting tour for me, just because I came away from that tour thinking it had been a titanic waste of time, and only later learned that it hadn't been, because props and love and respect to The Offspring. They're lovely people. They're a great band. They took a massive chance. Like, no one had fucking heard him. I literally couldn't sell like 10 tickets in the States before that tour. And they took me out. I think that was partly because I was just on deal with Epitaph Records and Brett was friends with them and all the rest of it. They took me out as a first on, and it was like, they call them the Sheds in the States. They're sort of around 5,000 or more capacity. They're outdoors. And they were so, you know, packed out full of like sunburnt, drunk Offspring fans. And then
that's a tough crowd.
Yeah, and they're there, and they know that the main sport is Sum 41, which is on brand. Do you know what I mean? Same ballpark. So they're ready for this, and then like, who or what is a Frank Turner, please? And I came out on my own with an acoustic guitar and an English accent and went, hello. And every fucking night I could visibly see what seemed to me to be the vast majority of the audience going, what the fuck is this supposed to be? And there were some rough shows on that tour for me in terms of people either not paying attention or being actively hostile. And I came, like, as I say, I came away from it thinking, it was a fun experience, but I'm really not sure they did anything with my career. And I'm completely wrong about that, because in years since, particularly in the cities that we played on that tour, it was the East Coast that we did, I just endless people coming up to me saying, oh man, yeah, first time I saw you was opening for Offspring. Amazing. And now I've been to like 20 shows or whatever. And the thing that people say over and over again about that is they were like, the main thing, they were like, we just couldn't believe the fucking balls on this guy coming out with an acoustic guitar in front of this crowd and English accent. And it seems to have worked.
Well, the thing is, it's very character building to play to people who don't want you to play. I've done it myself. I supported the Levelers, and it was a wonderful tour because they're great. Became good friends with them. But I came on stage with an electric guitar, glitter on my face, loop pedal. And annoyingly, the people who listen, the quiet ones, you can't kind of hear them being quiet and paying attention, but all you can hear is all the drunk people going, I love the Levelers, I can't wait for them to come on, what's this shit?
Sure. I opened for the Levelers myself in 2008, actually, and it was a really wonderful tour. I grew up with that band, so
you're more of a fit, I think, for their audience.
Definitely, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, sure. And some levels, the support act is a numbers game, and it's like, you know, that's why, incidentally, I've always said that I will support fucking anybody. I mean, there's obvious exceptions to that in terms of people with dodgy politics or whatever. But like, you know, I'll fucking open for Slayer. I'll open for Britney Spears. I don't give a shit. Partly because people are people, and people are equal. And people
like all sorts of music.
Yeah, and every single person in a room deserves to have their taste respected. And you never know, you might be their thing. But also, just because if you play to 10,000 people and win like 10% of that audience, that's 1,000 people.
That's great, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Fucking hell, that's 1,000 people.
It's mad, yeah.
You know, and so fucking do it. Take the fucking gig. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, I mean, so my wife is opening this tour at the moment, and it's her first kind of proper tour, and there's obviously a degree of nepotism in her being here and all the rest of it. But, you know, she sort of said, music I make isn't really like yours, and I don't know how it's going to go across. And I'm like, first of all, it's same things. First of all, respect people's taste. But secondly, you know, there's 1,500 people coming tonight. If you win 10% of them, that's 150 people, which is a good fucking turnout for anybody's show. Do you know what I mean? So like, just think of it in those terms.
And why shouldn't she get a gig just because she's married to you?
Right. Well, I mean, you know,
unfair.
well, it was funny. Quite. I mean, if you look at it that way, but it was kind of funny.
penalty,
Like when we were first kind of dating, she was really reticent about the idea of us doing any shows together, and I could see why. And I think it's a good impulse on her part.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while and a passage of years, and indeed a legal joining together, it was a bit like, for fuck's sake, do the tour.
Come on.
And she's smashing it, you know, and she's doing really well,
cool.
and it's obviously very nice having my wife on tour with me.
That's lovely. Talking about like the crashing highs and lows of being a musician. So going from, say, headlining Shepherd's Bush Empire to then supporting someone and getting talked over.
Sure.
How's that? How do you deal with that? How do you look after Frank on tour?
With some degree of difficulty. And there was definitely a time in my life when I handled that stuff quite badly. And there were a number of reasons for that. I had essentially constructed my life in this very one-dimensional way where I was the guy who was always on tour. And I was. And on the rare occasions when I go home, I'd have very little to do. And indeed, I got heavily involved in chemicals because it was a way of kind of feeling great and passing the time and all the rest of it. And it reached a crunch point for me because I'd always like tour all the fucking time, go home for like 4 days, get really fucked up once, recover for 3 days, go back on tour. And then I had like 4 months off and I came home and I got high and then I crashed out, recovered and then went, still not on tour, guess I'll do that again. And then suddenly I had an addiction. I had a substance abuse problem. And it was a really, really unpleasant time of my life. But it was also, you know, I didn't really have anything outside of being the guy who's always on tour. I didn't have exterior kind of like links, responsibilities, bonds, however you want to put it. And it was, in retrospect, a pretty unhealthy time for my mental health. And, you know, you come back off a tour and then almost, I mean, if I'm being 100% honest, which I think I should do, there were moments where I'd sort of go and like seek out bars in Camden where I kind of knew people would know who I was. Because I wanted to keep living that life that you do on tour where, as I was saying earlier, generally speaking, you're surrounded by people who know who you are and are interested in you.
And they're pleased to see you, aren't they?
Exactly.
And I've had it myself. I've done several European tours, just little places. I've set them up myself. I turn up and people are pleased to meet me because it would be weird if they weren't. Like they've invited me to go and play. Exactly. That is really addictive. And
there can be, you know, I mean, certainly lots of the crew people I know talk about this. There's a friend of mine has this wonderful story about like, getting back off, he's a tour manager for a very big band, and then like getting home and like trying to sort of tour manage the queue in the grocery store because it was annoying him, and then realizing that he has no authority to do this. No. You know, and this is a guy who'd just recently been like shoving musicians out of hotels into tour buses and, you know, getting shit done, man.
Well, especially I think if you have a crew of any kind, there's someone who's there to make sure you get places and help you out and support you in all the ways. So then you go home, and if you've got a partner at home or family or whatever, or if you don't, there's that thing of that loss of that person, that loss of that
completely.
help.
And there's definitely a level on which, at a certain level of touring as a musician, you become slightly like a helpless mewling child who is sort of shepherded from pillar to post. And you lose that when you go home. It's like, I have to decide when I want to eat.
To buy the food myself.
Yeah, right, exactly. I've actually been learning to cook in recent years because it's a thing I never did because I was always
I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. It turns out I'm a mean cheesecake maker.
Really?
Yeah. I announced I was going to make a cheesecake one night because we had a party at ours, and Jess, who is quite a good cook, was like, "Okay, good luck with that."
That's not easy.
Well, apparently not. But I've made 4 cheesecakes in the last few months, and they've all been on the money.
Very good.
It turns out I have a skill.
Recipe book next?
Oh goodness no! But then the next thing is I then there was the moment of hubris. I decided that maybe I was good at desserts generally, and tried to make a tiramisu, and it was a complete catastrophe.
They're really hard.
It was a coffee soup.
That sounds all right, to be honest.
It was not pleasant. One of the things I've noticed in recent years, which I'm really happy about, is that I used to get a thing, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, which I call the 9 o'clock shivers. When you get off a long period of time on tour and then you go home and you sit in front of the telly, at about 9 p.m. you start getting all amped up because there's something you're supposed to be doing, which is going on stage and engaging a crowd and all the rest of it. And I used to find that really hard. And in the band old days, that's probably when I'd start getting high. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But like nowadays, I've noticed in recent years, I'm not entirely sure quite how I've done this, but I've got really good at flipping the switch between tour and not tour. And I actually go home and I'm immediately in home mode. And that's cool because in the old days, you get 2 weeks off tour, and if you spend the first week still slightly being in tour mode, then that sucks, you know. Whereas now I've got much better at just go home and I'm just like, you know.
Funnily enough, last year I did the same. So I was back there was this one time I was back for maybe 4 days and went off on another support tour, and I decided to sort of just coast through it and not really engage. And then the next time I was like, well, who am I? What is this? No. So then the way I did it was like, I'll go and get the groceries then. I'm not just going to like act like my house is my hotel for 4 days and let my husband do everything. Yeah. So that did make a big difference, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you have to pay attention to yourself a bit. And one of the whole things about the touring world is the bravado that surrounds it, you know, and like whilst in the big picture, I think it's not a helpful thing. There is still a part of me that's attached to some of it in the sense that like, it's not everyone can hack it. Do you know what I mean? And like some people find it murderously awful. And I cannot extinguish the part of me that feels a little bit of pride in the fact that like I am a road dog who has been doing this since I was 16 and I can fucking hack it. But at the same time, there is part of that becomes unhelpful. Do you know what I mean? And because it becomes...
As a functioning adult,
Yeah, it becomes kind of... It becomes machismo after a certain point in time, which is not a pleasant character trait in anybody. Yeah. I've definitely worked on trying to kind of let that go. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure it makes me a better person because I'm comfortable sleeping on a bus.
I understand that because I used to pride myself on I could be away all the time and it's fine. And I'm just someone who's away all the time. I can't really engage in this. I'm away. Yeah. And then I realized that that's cool and everything, but there's loads more to life.
Exactly.
And I wanted to have more of a balanced life. So the last few years have been really different for me.
Do you know Tim Barry? Do you know Tim Barry? He used to be, well, they're actually back together again. He's a singer in a band called The Veil, who were gods to me when I was younger. And then he was one of the first people from the punk scene to start making acoustic kind of country records, which was an influence on my thinking in 2005. And he's a dear friend of mine and one of my very favorite writers and all the rest of it. He has a song about touring, which was my anthem for years, but this goes to all of this because I didn't sort of get all the meanings of the song at the first. Right. It's called On and On, and it's like, you know, how many days can you stay away before someone knows that you're gone, and how long can you stay in one place before you miss moving on? And I picked up on the sort of bravado part of that song, and I loved it, and it's my Tory anthem and all the rest of it. And I sort of didn't quite notice the absolute agony of the chorus line where it says it's all spinning wheels and cracked windshields, white lines and sage, open mouths, empty ears, and years that pass like days. And do you know what I mean?
It's really getting there.
Yeah, right. You know, and like Tim is much more a road dog than me. He's 10 years older than me. He's been doing it for longer. He's a train rider when he's not on tour, or at least was for a long time. And in the last few years, you know, he's settled down. He's got 2 kids now. He's got 2 lovely daughters and all the rest of it. And he's doing really well. But, you know, I definitely, you know, when I met him, I was like, I'm going to be like Tim Barry when I grow up. I'm going to be the biggest road dog of all time. And like, he's made some changes and sort of realigned his priorities a bit in a way that was quite sort of, it cut me down to size a bit. Do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, wow. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I think because at the end of the day, sooner or later, you're just going to end up at 60 with somebody who's literally only got one thing happening in their life. And is that really a target to aim for? Do you know what I mean?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No. Now, look, I want to respect your time because it's 5:30 and that's the time we had.
I'm enjoying this enormously.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good. So, as someone who's never listened to Bruce Springsteen, can you recommend 3 Bruce Springsteen songs to me? Because I know that he's had an impact on you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, much like with Dylan, I was a latecomer to Springsteen because I think like a lot of people from our both nationality and demographic, he was the dickhead with the white t-shirt and the blue jeans singing about Born in the USA and really, do you know what I mean?
That really put me off. That song put me off
too, for the longest time. And there's a record of his called Nebraska that swung my head.
Okay.
Actually that, and also the Sega sessions that he did, which was he did an album of trad folk songs, but with a kind of big country band, and it's this incredible record. I would say 3 songs, right?
Yeah.
I would say I would start with Reason to Believe.
Okay.
Which is the last track on Nebraska. And because it's a perfect example of his songwriting in the sense that if you don't pay attention to it, it's an upbeat, little swingy, little folk number. And it is one of the most, and indeed the chorus is like, at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe, which is a nice sentiment. But actually, if you get into it, the lyrics are some of the most fucking like crushingly bleak.
I like crushingly bleak.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it starts off as a guy just poking a dead dog with a stick in the ditch by the side of the motorway, and just thinking
ex-musician probably.
Right, exactly. and so you realize if you get into the song that chorus is actually like bleak as fuck in its way. It's not a triumphant, everything's going to be okay. It's just kind of like, please let there be hope is more the vibe, which is a much more sort of complex and profound statement, I think. So I'd start there. 3 songs. I mean, An underrated record of his for me is Devils and Dust. He definitely does kind of more folky records and more kind of rock records. And I definitely got into him through the folkier stuff because it was more in line with what I was listening to. Anyway, the song Devils and Dust itself is a song about Iraq war veterans with PTSD. And it is a beautifully observed piece of writing. He is the greatest character writer of our age in the sense that he inhabits his characters fully, and he has songs about being a racist fisherman in Texas, in which he really explores the character, and it's a beautiful thing because he's like angry he's a Vietnam vet and he's furious about the guy running the Vietnamese restaurant, and there's a happy ending, or at least a suggestion of resolution. It's not a celebration of this guy's character. But yeah, Devils and Dust, you know, we've got God on our side. At least there's something I can trust, you know.
Right.
And it's just, yeah, it's a beautiful piece of writing. And then at the end of the day, this is a cheesy and obvious choice, but like nobody does bombastic, redemptive rock and roll like Springsteen at his best. And the song Born to Run is unfucking believable as a piece of writing.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And it's a bit like somebody who has never seen The Godfather and then watches The Godfather. It's great, but part of the problem is that because The Godfather was so culturally defining, a lot of its tropes feel overused, and you have to remember that they weren't overused when they made that film. Yeah. That actually every film you've seen that feels a bit like this was influenced by this. Yeah. Similarly, there are bits of it where you're kind of like, well, okay, but like
heard that.
Yeah, but the thing is, you hadn't before Springsteen did it, and what he did with that record in particular, and with his career in general, mostly successfully, was he treads this line of celebrating Americana in a way that it's sort of underdog triumphalist. It's not fucking Reagan. Do you know what I mean? And it's not Make America Great Again. It's not that. It's a celebration of the American sort of underdog, the underclass, all the rest of it. And he plays the American idiom. And I think the thing that he did with the album Born to Run, which was so revolutionary, is he took kind of 50s rock and roll nostalgia and made it relevant to what America was like in the 70s in this way that's really artistically complex. Or actually, no, hold on, let's do Thunder Road instead. Let's start with Thunder Road, because it's like, you know, it's like there were ghosts in the eyes of all the boys that you sent away. They haunt these dusty beach roads and the burned out frames of and the rusted frames of burned out Chevrolets, and they scream your name at night in the street as your graduation gown lies in rags in the street.
Wow.
You know, and it's just like, it's all of the cheesy 50s perfect white picket fence America in tatters and in ruins, but there is still a glimmer of something hopeful in it that is just incredibly beautifully done and movingly done. And you know, sorry, I'm tearing up talking about this. At the end of the song, you know, the kiss off line, which is just unimprovable. He says, "This is a town full of losers, and we're pulling out of here to win." You know, it's just like, fuck, man. If I could write like that, I'd be more successful.
I mean, your song "Make America Great Again" is one of my favorites of yours as well.
Thank you.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I was staggered that nobody else got to that idea before me. I was in a hurry to get that song out because I thought somebody else was going to do that.
Well, I did a song called "I Want My Country Back," and I, by the way, which is the opposite to what you think.
Yeah, right.
I got called a white supremacist on Twitter the day I released that song. It was
amazing.
A fine moment in my life. But yeah, I
congratulations, welcome to the club.
Thank you so much. I couldn't believe that someone hadn't done that one. So similar. Who are your favourite artists at the moment, off the top of your head? Off the
top of my head, Hobo Johnson is like. Do you know Hobo Johnson?
No.
It's kind of like sort of indie hip hop. He's from Northern California. Cool. He is fucking brilliant. Okay. His voice, his lyricism is really fantastic. Big fan of that. Also, do you know Chris Wood?
No.
Motherfucker, Chris Wood is.
I think so.
He's made a bunch of records over the years. He's older. He's sort of in his 50s, as far as I know. He's from like Aldershot or something. Okay. Somewhere like odd.
Aldershot
like
has
that.
music too.
It does, or at least a friend of mine who manages him is from Aldershot. I don't know whether he's from Aldershot. That might be completely wrong. But he writes in this way that is absolutely startlingly original and brilliant. And he has a song about his teenage daughter going to university, which is, if it doesn't make you cry, you have no soul.
You're making me think of the song that always makes me cry, which is "She's Leaving Home" by the Beatles. I can't get through it without bawling my eyes out.
Right.
So for some reason, that's
try that song. I think it's called "Bright Young Thing."
Okay.
And,
no.
But I mean, but it reminds me of kind of 50s and 60s kitchen sink dramas on the radio. Like, it is so real. Like, there's a song called "So Much to Defend," which is this beautiful thing because each verse is just a little sketch portrait of a life. It's like, Jenny does her yoga after choir practice upstairs at the church, and she stacks the chairs, and it's just stuff about somebody whose son wrecked his car during his driving lesson. It's so real.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then at the end of each verse, it's just like there's so much to defend, and it's this incredible celebration of normal life.
I think we both might cry in a minute.
Yeah, but no, who the fuck writes like that?
It's like music's important or something.
Oh my goodness!
Despite
Chris Wood and Hobo Johnson
shyness.
would be my two off the top of the head. I did also mention Grace Petrie once today already, and I'm so excited about her existence as
she's
a writer.
Wonderful.
She is, and I think she's going to do. I think she has done great things, and I suspect that she's going to do greater things.
I was so pleased when she went on tour with you because I played with her. I think 2012 at Chris TT's midwinter picnic in Brighton, and I was just blown away.
Yep.
And she's great. I love getting to chat to her, and she has said she's going to come on this.
Oh, really? Well, I was going to. You asked me who I would say should be on this next.
Who would you like to
Grace
be on
Petrie.
the podcast? But she's going to, so you have to choose someone else. Someone else I can ask. Let me ask the question so we've got it recorded as well, because I haven't done that.
Yeah.
Frank, who do you think should be on this podcast next?
I think you should talk to Grace Petrie next. We did it. Brilliant.
Awesome. I think we should too. It's good that I emailed her a few days ago and she said yes.
I just funny did that afterwards.
Yeah. And finally, what is your next adventure?
I am in the middle of what I was saying earlier about irons in the fire. I've got loads of different sort of thoughts about things that I might do in the near future.
You don't have to give away the secrets, by the way. Just
No, totally. I might be about to spend an enforced month at home, in which case I will hopefully get better at the piano. That's one of the things I want to do.
Yeah, that's always on my list.
I've got a piano in my house, and I just figured that if I got a piano in my house by a process of osmosis, I would get better at it. And it turns
I've had one
out
for 4 years.
It doesn't work.
No,
but
it's good for putting books on, though.
It is, yeah. And then. The main thing in my mind right now is that I'm working on another record, which I know is kind of run of the mill on some levels, but like, as I hope is clear to people by now, I try and switch up every time I make a record. I don't want to repeat myself. And like, I did a kind of socially engaged electro pop record, and then I did a kind of like historical folk record. The next thing is going to be really fucking different again.
Cool.
And I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to fuck with a lot of people's heads.
Great.
I'm not going to say any more about it, but it's going to be exciting. Yeah.
Brilliant. It's always exciting when you put music out.
Isn't it?
You're very prolific, and
but
it's very inspiring.
I'm feeling really in the zone as a writer right now, in a way that I haven't for a little while, and it's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time in your dressing room with me.
This has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you. Yay. Backstage with Frank Turner after a brilliant show. And I forgot to ask him a question earlier, which was which 3 of his own songs would he tell someone to listen to if you've never heard him before?
I would pick Get Better because it's a song that I'm very proud of. And it's every time I finish a song, when you start writing a song, you have a vision of how it's going to be. And when you finish, you can evaluate how close to the mark you were. And some days you kind of go, ugh. And some days you go, yeah. And that's probably the biggest, bullseye for me in my writing career, I would think. So I would choose that one. I would choose Try This at Home.
Okay.
Be a song because it sort of indicates the fact that of where I came from musically, let's say that. And then I would choose Be More Kind because whilst I am slightly resistant to the idea of songwriters having a message with a capital M to deliver to the world, if I have anything to say to anyone right now, it would be that. And also musically, that was a song that was an attempt to move from where I began as a solo artist with kind of folk tropes into, and I mean, it's quite specifically structured as a song arrangement wise. It goes from a fingerpick guitar to a kind of Berlin techno beat, and it was sort of trying to show that I have depth, man. So I would pick those 3.
I have to say, as a musician who does a lot of other stuff, I don't often feel like a lazy person, but Frank Turner has a wonderful talent of making me feel like there's so much more to do. What an inspiration. Thank you so much, Frank. Now, hopefully you're in the mood for some links to listen to and watch some stuff. Head to penfriend.rocks/Frank for the full show notes for this episode, which includes links to all the artists mentioned, plus the pre-order link for Frank's exciting upcoming split album with No FX. There's also news on his weekly independent venue Love online gigs and his new live album, Live in Newcastle. Every Thursday he's been on YouTube playing a live gig and raising money for venues who are in trouble. None of us know where any of this is going at the moment, but if there are going to be gigs in the future, we're going to need venues. So a big shout out to Music Venue Trust and to Frank Turner for everything he's been doing to try and help. Tune in and support if you can. I make this podcast and all the music in it myself. And yes, the theme tune is an actual song, which I'll be sharing with you when the time is right. Thanks to everyone who messaged me last week asking about that. In the meantime, you can get 2 free Penfriend songs when you sign up to the Correspondent Club, so please do check that out at penfriend.rocks. Next week I'll be sharing my conversation with the one and only Charlotte Hatherley. This was very exciting for me. Hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss it, and I look forward to chatting to you again next time. Your ratings and reviews are very much appreciated. I'm just so pleased you're listening. Thank you. Have a great week. Bye!